So, who are you and what do you teach?
I'm John Lomax. I teach history here at Ohio Northern University.
All right. And what classes do you teach?
I teach Western civilization, world civilization, medieval Europe, ancient world, crusades, the history of law, and military history.
You have a new class, the Myth in History, correct?
Well, I'm teaching myth and history here in a little bit as a transitions experience course to freshmen, but I'm going to retitle it Myth as Reality. Basically, I have the students examine the ways that people in antiquity and points forward all the way up into the 20th century all the way up into the 21st century, sometimes understand the world in terms of who is responsible, who the culprit is, rather than looking at more objective factors.
And you also teach historiography.
Yeah, historiography. It's a course on how to research and write a term paper, historiography meaning the writing of history, to write a properly researched and annotated, a fully annotated research paper. Also, we study how historians in the past have thought about history as they were examining the sources that the past has left to us. So it's a combination of practical and theoretical questions about the writing of history.
All right. And what are your research interests?
Mostly I study mostly I write on the conflict between church and state in the Middle Ages, particularly the quarrels between the Emperor Frederick II and the papacy in the 13th century. I've also written on medieval mystical theology and how it connects with the jurisprudence of the Middle Ages, as well as on questions of property and the ownership of antiquities in the Middle Ages.
Okay. Give us some idea of how you work with students to help them get their research out there. Do you have projects with students? Do you take them to conferences, etc.?
Most of the work that I do with students on projects happens in the historical methods or historiography course. I have them go to work on projects that require them to use primary sources. I work with them on digging out the sources, on organizing their thoughts on those sources, and writing them up into good, strong, declarative statements about various problems in the past. Sometimes I do something similar with people who are writing a senior thesis. But most of the work that I've done with students on research has been in the historiography course.
All right, you took a group of students to a conference a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I took a group of students up to the Michigan meeting of Phi Alpha Theta at Oakland University. The 4 students read papers that they had written in historical methods, well as adjusted for a 20-minute reading limit. And I've taken students to other places as well, including other Phi Alpha Theta conferences, the Ohio Valley History Conference, and the undergraduate research conference at Purdue University Calumet up near Chicago. They do pretty well. The students are ready, they're confident, and they field questions very effectively. This past weekend, one of our students won the prize for the best paper in medieval or early modern history. By the time they get there, they're ready. My view on writing is that the mother of good writing is rewriting. And by the time these students get up in front of people who can question what they claim, who can evaluate their historical claims intelligently and sometimes aggressively, that they're ready. Sometimes I've had students who come out of these classes who have publication-ready papers, The hardest part about getting them published is getting the students to send them in. They think, well, I'm just an undergraduate, how in the heck can I get this thing published? But it turns out that well-researched scholarship is just that. It's well-researched, and if it's well-written, well-presented, forceful, well, that's what journals want. And journals have to publish, and they want to publish the good stuff. And some of our students have produced some very good stuff.
Okay. You're kind of the king of field trips. You at least take some interesting ones. Where do you go on field trips?
Well, I don't know if my field trips are that interesting. We go down to the Ohio Historical Society to talk with the archives professionals there and the artifacts people. We've taken some field trips over to the university's nature center, from which we branched out to Zoar Village and Schönbrunn Village. These sites for the the remote sites of the Ohio Historical Society. We've been down to Janadenhutton. It's hard for me to say that, but that's how they say it here in Ohio. It's probably Gnadenhütten, or something closer to that, the site of an Indian massacre in the days of the early Republic. But
what was the weekend seminar you did at the Nature Center this year?
well, I did a weekend seminar, one of these one-hour intensive courses down at the Nature Center on the Salem witch trials, and it went really well. I was teaching an honor seminar on the witch craze of the early modern period, from like 1400 to about 1750. The students in it all picked a particular phase of witch hunting in a particular place, but none of them picked the Salem witch hunts for some reason. Maybe they all had read enough on it that they thought that they understood them. So I said, well, let's go down there and do the Salem witch hunts down at the Nature Center. So we went down there, and for 2 solid days we did the Salem witch hunts. I provided them with a bunch of documents from the trials, court transcripts, and also some readings about the witch hunts. And we came to some conclusions about how the Salem trials of 1792, or 1692, the Salem trials of 1692 reflected a lot of the basic trends in the witch hunting that took place in the early modern period. It was a lot of fun.
Okay. Where do you go with your military and society class?
My military and society class. Oh, yeah. I forgot all about that. We go down to the United States Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to look at the airplanes. It's a pretty good place to talk about the evolution of warfare, at least warfare in the 20th century. They start with the earliest uses of aviation in warfare, and they go forward all the way down to the present. It's a huge collection of airplanes, and a good place to talk about really important topics like the financing of war, the need to develop a social consensus behind war if a government intends to succeed, the technology of warfare, the approaches to warfare that do not involve direct combat, deterrence in particular after the Second World War. And even little things like the names that are on the airplanes from the Second World War. They tend to be, well, lurid.
All right. Thank you.
And